Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Connecting the Supply Chain to Enact Change webinar. We're going to be starting in about 1 minute. This is going to be a pretty straightforward webinar, so you can keep your cameras off and stay on mute through the majority of the session today. There will be an opportunity to ask our participants questions, so at that time, you can either put it in the chat box or unmute yourself. But as you come on, you can go ahead and keep your cameras off. Again, we'll be starting in about 1 minute. Okay, looks like we are right at 2 o'clock on the Eastern time zone. We've got a couple other time zones joining us today. So we're right at 2, 1, 12, 11, tomorrow, if you're calling from Australia, o'clock. So welcome all. We're going to continue admitting people as we get started here, but I want to make sure we give all of our speakers plenty of time to share their work with you today and give you all plenty of time to ask them questions. So really quick, I wanted to say welcome. Thank you all for taking the time to join a discussion involving supply chains and how we can all work together to impact our conservation efforts on agricultural land. I'm Ashley Brucker, the Ag Conservation Innovations Outreach and Program Manager for American Farmland Trust, based here in Columbus, Ohio. And I'm joined by Julie Platts, who is the Soil Health for Dairy Suppliers Ohio Conservation Technician, also based in Ohio. We are going to be facilitating the discussion today. So I'm going to go through a few housekeeping things, get those out of the way for us, and then we'll do some introductions and really get down to business and what you guys are all tuning in for, which is to listen to all of our great speakers we have for you. So for housekeeping, like I said a little bit ago, this session is going to be recorded. So we are already recorded. So you can share the session with any of your colleagues that weren't able to join, any farmers who might be interested in the program and need more information. You will be receiving that information at or that link for the recording at a later time. Everyone is muted and your cameras can remain off. We will continue that through the entire session because this is going to be a webinar format. So our speakers are going to be presenting to you. You will be able to ask questions after each speaker, as well as during a panel discussion that we have organized for the end of the webinar. You can do so by using the chat box to ask your questions. Just pop them in there. Julie is going to be monitoring that. So also if you have any technical questions as far as technology, audio, anything like that, pop those in there so that we can help you out there. Otherwise, you will be invited at the end to take yourself off mute, ask questions that way as well. So let's get started. The Soil Health for Dairy Suppliers project is a joint effort between a number of partners, including corporations, government agencies, and nonprofits. Danone North America, National Fish and Wildlife, and NRCS contributed resources to this partnership, allowing American Farmland Trust to collaborate with sustainable environmental consultants in assisting and supporting grain farmers in Ohio and Kansas who are supplying feed to area dairies to develop and implement long-term soil health strategies. So the speakers that we have with us today are going to provide more detailed insight into their organization's involvement in this project. This group has put a lot of time and energy into jumpstarting this project and really getting it off the ground and moving forward. So I'm really excited to give each one of them time to share their work with you and their involvement with you and allow you to have a dialogue with them. Really quickly, I am going to give some introductions for our speakers, and then when they each do their presentation, they will give you a little bit more information if I miss something. So first, we are going to have Tina Owens, the Senior Director of Food and Agriculture Impact for Danone North America. Tina will be talking about Danone North America's participation in this project and why they have decided to focus on soil health. Following Tina will be Jensen, Director of Sustainability and Strategic Partnerships with Sustainable Environmental Consultants. You may hear us refer to that as SEC. Jenny will be talking about the Eco Practices platform and how this technology can be used to assist farmers. Our final speaker will be Brandt, Agriculture Conservation Innovations Director for American Farmland Trust. And Brian is going to be talking about kind of the big picture, how everybody fits together and conservation in the supply chain. And then we're going to wrap everything up with a nice little bow by having Julie touch on the project itself. And she's going to give you the current status of the project in Ohio and what we expect our next steps to move forward with the project will be. Each speaker will have about 20 minutes. We'll then have time for a couple of questions that you can ask directly to that speaker. And again, any questions can be posted in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself at the given time. And then at the very end, again, we will have the entire panel on board, everybody unmuted, so you can ask questions to the group as you need to. So to get us started, let's come over to Tina Owens with Danone North America. And Tina is going to go ahead and share her screen, and we should be set to go.
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. Can you hear me and see the screen okay? All right, wonderful. Really appreciate the American Farmland Trust team bringing us all together for this conversation, and I'm happy to talk about Danone's Soil Health Program, but also the collaboration that we're looking to get off the ground here with you and SEC. A little bit about Danone North America. Danone North America, as it exists currently, is the world's largest B Corp with a triple bottom line, which was incorporated in April of 2018. And so I like to share this slide because a lot of people aren't familiar with who Danone North America is because of the youngness of the transition of our business, which was combined with White Wave in 2017. So there's a smattering of our brands on page. Hopefully these are brands that you know and love well, but these are the power behind the company, and then the farmers that help power these brands are what the focus of this conversation is for today. So what else I think you need to know about us is our mission, which is bringing health through food to as many people as possible. So as the world's largest B Corp with a people, planet, and profit impact, we're looking at what the health is throughout the entire value chain for how we source our foods. And it's important that agriculture is part of this conversation because large food companies like us have to be very conscious of what our carbon impact is and our impact on the environment. And so it's important to note that over 50% of our carbon emissions are actually linked to agriculture. So if we fix our manufacturing footprint or our transportation footprint or any of these other big levers we have to pull, but we don't touch agriculture, we will have missed the single largest lever that we need to pull for as a company in order to meet our greenhouse gas targets. So those targets include 50% reduction by 2030 and completing net zero or complete offset by 2050. And as I mentioned, agriculture is a big part of that. We're looking at our soil health program and the regenerative agriculture program as being an unlock and helping reduce scope 3 emissions, which would be the emissions that happen on farm as we source our products. And as you may have heard about regenerative agriculture, the soil-centric focus can help grow soil organic matter and help sequester carbon. And so our definition is farming practices that protect soils, water, and biodiversity and respect animal welfare. We acknowledge the key role of farmers, the positive impact of farming, and the economic viability of those farmers. And we're looking to help restore ecosystems, contribute to mitigating climate change and ensuring that our systems are strong enough to feed the next generation. It's also important to note that we look at regenerative agriculture as spanning all agricultural systems, so conventional, organic, non-GMO, transitional, et cetera. And in 2018, the company made a significant announcement of $6 million in funding for soil health research programs. And at the time that we announced, we were partnered in creating the program with The Ohio State University, as well as Cornell University. and also sustainable environmental consultants, which Jenny is here and going to talk about that, their programs with us next. But it's with this third-party validation of what's happening on our farms and in the field that is the important way that this work comes to life. And so in addition to having this third-party validation and these year-on-year metrics and tracking that's happening, we've also worked on opening really big doors as it relates to farmer funding. So that $6 million that I mentioned, we hope that's just the start. And we've looked to open big doors like conservation innovation grants that go across multiple states, or philanthropic capital that our farmers can use in conjunction with the technical assistance that we're paying for through SEC, so that there's a stacked incentive for farmers to adopt these practices. And so National Fish and Wildlife Foundation is on here because they're actually the partnership that brought us together with American Farmland Trust. We won't go into all the mechanics of that. We get too many names on the screen, but just know that they're some of the power behind the scenes and how we're making all of this happen. We've also worked on unlocking impact investing capital through Replant, which could offer our farmers low or no cost loans that they can use in conjunction as part of the transition to regenerative soil-centric practices. Just gonna give you a few highlights about our program, and then we'll turn it over to Jenny to talk about how these metrics come to life in the field with our farmer partners. So we're in year 3 of sharing our results, and we've gone from 26,000 acres in year 1 to 82,000 acres now across 35 farms. And as you can see, we have 5 different pillars that we're focused on, including soil health, biodiversity, water, carbon and energy, and economy and productivity. And each one of those is an important way of thinking about what's happening on the farm, because regenerative agriculture is meant to take into account multiple systems that are all working together to create ecosystem health. And so as I mentioned earlier, we're agnostic about which farming system this is being used on. You can see across the bottom, we have just over 50,000 acres that are in conventional or non-GMO project verified, almost 29,000 acres that are certified organic. And then this last year, the ag sourcing team was able to expand into almond orchards, which we're very excited about, and supports brands like Silk that have almond milk. So looking to go beyond dairy. And there's a lot more to bring to life here on how these programs work with integration with the farms. Again, Danone is paying for the technical assistance at those farms, and then opening really big doors on funding to help farmers move through that transition process, as well as looking at the farmer economic viability. So there's work that's been done that was announced very recently about a return on investment tool that helps farmers calculate as they make this change on farm, what it means for their bottom line. And then of course, partners like AFT are helping us bring to life the funding and practice adoption on farm, which is why we're all here together today. So with that, I will actually turn it back over to Julie and Ashley, or over to Jenny, to take us through the next segment.
Great, thanks, Tina. So I do want to give some of our participants the opportunity to ask questions or get some clarification if they need to. Julie, do we have any questions in the chat box?
So far, we do not have any questions coming in on the chat. I have some questions for Tina while we give people a chance to type them up if they would like. So Tina, as a corporation, do you feel, Danone as a corporation, do you feel consumers are now more invested on whether you are implementing regenerative ag and kind of what that looks like for you guys as a corporation?
Yeah, so the organic consumer is aware of soil health, and there's consumer research that's showing that they are looking to shop in ways with brands that are doing meaningful work on the ground. There's also a budding awareness of consumers on the carbon footprint of the food that they eat. And you have some major players like Unilever and others that have actually committed to carbon labeling across their portfolios. And so while it might just be kind of starting in the organic sector right now, it's worth noting that there's much more brand activity, even beyond Danone, that will educate consumers on the carbon footprint of their foods that will help drive this conversation. So Danone's in a leadership space and getting ahead of how this looks for our individual products that will allow us to have that conversation with consumers going forward.
Great, thank you. That kind of leads me into my next question. Has being a leader in regenerative ag and kind of pushing for this caused a return for Danone in any certain way? I mean, obviously you're continuing with these programs and pushing for them. And have you seen that kind of come back to support your company more?
So we have a 5-year pilot that was kicked off in 2018. As part of that, we're looking to prove the return on investment and the economic viability within our farming partners first. And so, we need to get through the full scope of the program. I just shared year 3 results with 2 more years coming. Also, the Conservation Innovation Grant that we received in conjunction with National Fish and Wildlife Foundation is looking to track the farmer economic viability as well. Now, when you look out at our supply chains, it's important that we have farmers that are able to invest in next decade and next generation. And so helping them, get better footing as it relates to overall economic viability in the face of significant climate change remains very important, because that has a supply chain impact on Danone if that disruption starts to actually impact whether or not we're able to source our critical ingredients.
Absolutely, thank you so much. I'm going to remind participants at this time that you can drop questions in the chat, and we will have time for more questions and panel discussion at the very end. Thank you so much, Tina.
Thanks, Tina and Julie, for those follow-up questions. We are now going to come over to Jensen with Sustainable Environmental Consultants. Jenny, you can go ahead and unmute and share your screen and get started with your presentation.
Great. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Ashley, for the introduction. And I think I just found my mute button finally when I shared my screen. So wonderful. I'll jump in. Appreciate the opportunity today to speak alongside American Farmland Trust and Danone North America. I'll share a little bit about what eco practices is, how it works, and some success stories. As Ashley mentioned, I'm Jensen. I serve as Sustainable Environmental Consultants, Director of Sustainability and Strategic Partnerships, SEC for short. In my role, I work with our clients and partners on tailored sustainability programs for their supply chain. A little bit more background on myself. I've been with SEC for 5 years now. Before that, I spent a short time in Iowa Soybean Association and graduated from Iowa State University with degrees in agronomy, biology, and environmental science. I'm in West Des Moines, Iowa today, and it is beautiful weather. We were just talking about how nice it is to finally see some spring join us. So what is eco practices? I'll mention it's a third-party verification and quantification tool for sustainable or regenerative agriculture. And as Tina mentioned, there's a lot of different definitions of, what is regenerative agriculture? What does it mean? We get that question a lot. My definition, although there are many, is that I think for a farm to be regenerative, it means that you're a land steward and you restore the ecosystem, which means that you understand the interconnectedness and don't just look at things with one angle. It's not just one practice, but to kind of reference what Tina just mentioned about Danone North America's definition, is it's a set of practices that protect soils, water, and biodiversity. For sustainability, I use the 3 pillars. So environmental, economic, and social. And some say animal welfare is that 4th pillar for agriculture. But we need that to be in a balance to have sustainability present. Tina mentioned the economics. Economic sustainability as well as environmental sustainability are very important. We need both of those to have long-term well-being for future generations. And that economic can be a large barrier to entry. So this is the lens we look through with our Sustainability Risk Management Division of SEC that's powered by our Eco Practices platform. So Sustainable Environmental Consultants has been around since about 2008. We're rooted in supporting agriculture. We really started with compliance work, so working closely with feedlot expansion plans, dairy infrastructure, nutrient management plans, compliance work, soil testing, and more. We're not owned or associated with big agriculture. Most importantly, we do not sell inputs. We don't sell fertilizer, chemicals, biological seed. We don't have any other agenda behind what we do, which really positions ourselves to be that true third party and unbiased, passionate about supporting regenerative agriculture. Our process involves discovery, collection, documentation, verification, and generation, which I'll briefly cover. But before I get to that, a little bit about who Eco Practices is. So here I've got a few of our core Eco Practices team members. As I mentioned, we're headquartered in West Des Moines, Iowa, but really spread out across the Midwest. We have some that are on family farming operations. We have a pretty diverse group at Eco Practices. We have a large agronomic team, engineers, environmental technicians, former NRCS employees, ag communication specialists, and PhDs that handle our technology and big data. So a little bit more on how it works. At a high level today, with Eco Practices, our goal is really to share the story of agriculture and have the proof behind it. And that starts with data collection, but quality data is very important. Data can be a challenging piece to collect for different sustainability programs. With Eco Practices, we reduce the burden of data collection. We collect the data where it is and how it is. One way we do this is by driving value with existing information. We have technology built to be able to use current farm management software, precision technology. We're not a checklist process, and we don't have a platform where producers have to learn how to use it and spend hours to regurgitate their records. We've built a streamlined process to be able to capture the quality data as easy as possible. We also do this by building trust with our relationships with producers, as well as with their trusted advisors. So all of this different data is housed in a safe and secure internal database that we call EcoProducer. It's very important that this data belongs to you, to the producers. It's not shared or used for any other purpose. We have a unique process to quantifying impacts, and we're looking at things such as soil carbon, greenhouse gas, erosion, nitrogen leaching, phosphorus losses, soil conditioning index, and more. It's not a cookie cutter approach with Eco Practices. We don't put producers into management buckets or take a paintbrush across an entire county with a particular color and say, this is where you fit. We understand that each operation has unique challenges and opportunities. So our approach is at a subfield level, which means we're considering the variety of soil types across a field and the weather that impacts that field to arrive at our different environmental outcomes. We provide outcomes with continued support to our clients and their supply chain farmer partners. We don't just dump out spreadsheets of information or generate reports, hand them over and say, good luck, we'll see you next year and we'll do this again. We're here to help communicate those outcomes. We review those outcomes with participants so that they understand the value of the practices that they're doing now and can see different scenario plannings for, what if, before effort or dollars are spent. And that's part of our collaborative, sustainable, continuous improvement planning process, which is a mouthful, so we have called that SKIP. We deliver farmer-facing reports that are theirs to use. We have farms that use that report to share with their family. For example, maybe they have a sister that's not on farm, but doesn't quite understand why we're spending money on cover crops. We have seen the report be used with landowners. Why do you want to put in this edge of field practice, or why would you want to change your tillage? We provide a report that helps explain what does that mean for them as a landowner, the value of their land. We have farms take it to their bank, use it at community meetings, provide data from those reports on social media, on websites, and even take that to their buyers. Eco Practices has flexible reporting. So our reports look different for different projects, for different supply chain sustainability programs. We also deliver different versions of reports for different audiences. I mentioned the farm level reporting, but what about a report for a co-op, a buyer, a state level, a company, a brand? We understand that some in the supply chain might not have ever been to a farm or don't really understand agriculture. It's agriculture's responsibility to a point to provide that education. We like to do that through dashboards, infographics, one-pagers, different reports for this purpose. Robust stats and projections are great, but if we have to plan for the unknown and communicate that. A plan is only as good as a plan. Mother Nature is going to have her own plan. And here's a couple examples of why this information is so powerful. We had a question for a project on why did our cover crop chart dip in 2019 in Iowa? Well, that definitely does look different than 2018. It doesn't mean we didn't reach our goal. What happened is we had significant flooding. While we should have been harvesting soybeans, we were literally kayaking through farm fields. If we can't harvest, we certainly can't plant a cover crop. Another question we received was, why did the yield take such a dive in 2020? This was a pretty recent question for Iowa. Well, it wasn't due to practice changes and failures and practice changes. We had a large-scale catastrophic crop destruction from a derecho. So it's all part of the story, and it begins again fresh with the next growing season. Our projects are not a one and done, call it good, we're sustainable, check the box. It's a journey. And each year we make new management decisions, and depending on those decisions with different conditions. So speaking about different decisions, that kind of leads me back to that long mouthful I said, our Sustainable Continuous Improvement Plan, which we call SKIP. And continuous improvement is part of that story and part of that journey. It starts out with number one, which is our progress. We want to understand and list out all of the current efforts and impacts of those efforts, quantifying the good, show credit where it's deserved. And we need to understand where we are to know where we can go. So that leads into number two, that's our goals. These can be short-term, long-term goals. Maybe we're looking at expanding cover crop 5% next year, or looking at diversifying a cover crop into a new cocktail mix, or maybe increasing soil testing. Long-term, maybe we're looking at new equipment or adding an edge of field practice. It's important to know this isn't a prescriptive process. It's really driven by the evaluation of specific strengths and how those drive efficiency and ultimately improve environmental outcomes at the farm. This process allows us to really meet people where they're at. It's developed for local resource concerns tied very closely to the NRCS conservation practice standards. Maybe we're in a high priority watershed and can align with that watershed implementation plan to support that producer. Maybe we're part of a state nutrient reduction strategy that we can weave into this plan. It's also tied to local, state, and federal, maybe even private initiatives and potential funding opportunities. Again, it's a collaborative process to learn from the project and work together to create a plan and enact that plan and find ways to move the needle on regenerative agriculture. So what do these outcomes look like? I've got an example here of a western region of the US on the left and an eastern region of the US on the right. We talked about sustainability and regenerative agriculture at one farm might not be the same for another. For example, water. Water can be a common measurement. However, in Ohio, we have a lot of water, maybe some water quality issues, but in Western Kansas, we're looking at water quantity issues. We also use different measurable metrics. So for example, reducing 301 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, a reduction in greenhouse gases. That's powerful, but not a lot of people know what 300 tons of this carbon dioxide means. So how do we use different graphics to explain those impacts? We also assist those along the supply chain that might need other results or need to meet other sustainability initiatives. We can support those efforts through the streamlined process. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. So what are some success stories of supporting farms with eco practices? Our process allows for understanding incremental changes and to celebrate successes before we jump off a cliff and really dive into implementing regenerative agriculture. We need to understand how those practices are going to impact your operation. We get to be an ear that proudly hears about the different struggles and challenges and practices and share that information. We've also done some watershed projects. So groups of producers want to share with their local community what they're doing upstream to be part of the solution in their impaired waterways. We've been able to assist with those presentations on behalf of those farmer groups to local municipalities, even speak to some that are on the drinking water division. where there's no hostility. It's simply for an educational purpose, and it really made the city proud to actually see and understand what's happening in these farm fields upstream. As Tina mentioned, we're part of some innovative projects with Danone, as well as others, where we're looking at making equipment and infrastructure changes. For example, it's looking at flamers or roller crimpers or different manure storage techniques or manure application methods to explore these changes and sharing the impact of those changes with other producers. We also get excited when we call a farm or talk to a farm and are talking about data, but it turns into a FaceTime call so that they can show the cover crop that's coming up, or they can show us a small habitat project that just went in. This last year definitely has been challenging with not being on farm as much and being more remote. But we're always impressed to see how innovative farmers are. To paint a little bit of a picture here, kind of in recap, we're at a crossroads with agriculture. We don't have a lot of time to wait. We as an ag community need to be proactive and not reactive. We want to broadcast our actions and how agriculture, all crops and animal agriculture, is a climate solution. And as I mentioned before, it's our story to share. SEC prides ourselves in being farmer focused. We have projects from California to Maine. We're in over 30 states with projects in dairy, pork, poultry, row crop, and even specialty crop. We understand that various feed for animal agriculture. We don't just focus on corn and soy. We know that there's silage, haylage, cottonseed, rice hulls, sugar beet pulp. We're not limited in capturing the impact in field or on farm. And we're also not just focusing on large operations. Our process works on a 20-cow dairy farm to thousands of head. I'll wrap it up there. I'm happy to take any questions. You can learn more about us at our website, ecopractices.com, or follow us on LinkedIn. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jenny. That was really great information. Those the farm reports that you showed are very cool. I love that. That was the first opportunity I've had to really look at those and have you explain them. So thanks for sharing those. I also loved your bit about being proactive, not reactive. And I think that's the same idea that everyone who's on this call today, that's why a lot of folks are here, is they are trying to be proactive. So with that, it doesn't look like we have any questions in the chat just yet, but please go ahead and pop those in there or unmute yourself if you have any questions for Jenny. Julie, I believe you had a couple of questions that you wanted to follow up with.
Thank you, Ashley. Jenny, with that farm report, do you find that farmers are more open to implementing or learning more about regenerative ag processes once they see kind of the current outputs that their farm has?
Yeah, great question. So I think it does drive excitement. It helps drive the conversation. It's something tangible to be able to see how all of these management decisions made throughout the year really do have an impact. So being able to see that in a report that they can utilize in multiple different ways really does drive excitement.
Great, thank you. And that kind of, again, feeds into my next question. Has eco practices, in your experience, how has it impacted the relationship with farmers? I know you touched on that briefly about, they FaceTime you and they're so excited to show you guys what they're doing. But has it really given them the ability to see what those changes are, actually making in results of their outputs?
Yeah, for relationships that we've been in that are, multi-year, looking at changes from one report to the next, and really allowing that to kind of bring everyone to the table for, advancing sustainability in the supply chain. I think I'll mention too that, it kind of drives to efficiency from our perspective, bringing that third party view. Not connected to, I guess no other strings attached. We're really looking at how do we work together with different partners to provide efficiency on the operation and put dollars back into the pocket. Agriculture doesn't have a lot of time to tell their story. It's not that we do a poor job. It's just we don't have time. very busy people. So this is just one way that we've seen it be able to help drive conversations.
Great. We do have a couple questions coming in the chat box. Is SCC, or I'm guessing, is eco practices an annual evaluation? So in your experience, do farmers come back year after year?
Yeah, with most of our projects designed for supply chain, we are in multi-year projects. Yes.
Great. And then does SCC address farmer economics with the eco practices platform and the sustainable continuous improvement plan?
We do, yes. For some of our projects, we do have, we incorporate different ROI pieces within as part of our SCIP. We do a lot of different scenario planning. So that allows us to look at practice changes from an environmental standpoint, as well as an economic standpoint before practices are implemented.
Great, thank you so much. That is all I have for you. Again, I'll remind participants that you can continue to drop questions in the chat box, and we'll have time at the end again as well.
All right. And I will just take a beat here. If there is anyone who wanted to unmute themselves to ask Jenny a question, you can do so now. All right. I will go ahead, like Julie said, you can put those in the chat box, but I will go ahead and move on to our next speaker. So we've heard from Tina with Danone North America, we've heard from Jenny with SEC, and now we're going to kind of bring this full circle of how we are all working together with enacting the supply chain by presenting Brian Brandt with American Farmland Trust. He is going to be kind of talking about the big picture of how we all fit together in this project. So Brian, go ahead and share your screen.
All right, can you see it all right, Ashley?
Yes,
all right.
Looks good.
All right, thank you, Ashley. So just to, I guess, briefly introduce myself, I'm Brian Brandt. I direct AFT's Ag Conservation Innovations Initiative. That's one of our national initiatives. And essentially with my short presentation, I just want to give everyone a sense of, one, why AFT has, I guess, the importance of AFT of being a part of the partnerships like we've entered into with SEC and Danone. So some background on how AFT works, the importance to this kind of work to AFT and all of our different programs. And then just briefly give an overview of how we're working with the partners. And then actually when Julie is able to present, she'll be presenting really more of the in-depth information on the specific information related to this project. So from also I'd like to give just a little background on myself as well. I've been with AFT for 20 years. The first about 10 years of my work at AFT really focused on risk management and understanding the barriers of why farmers sometimes hold back from adopting conservation practices or soil health practices or regenerative agricultural practices. And more in the last 10 years, been more involved in projects related to, developing new opportunities, new ways to bring funding into the conservation equation. So thinking about different sources of funding to incentivize adoption of conservation practices. So for AFT, if you're not familiar with American Farmland Trust, American Farmland Trust is a private nonprofit corporation. It was formed in 1980, primarily formed initially to work at the local, state, and federal level to develop farmland protection programs. And that actually is still one of the core components of American Farmland Trust mission. But over that time span, we've actually really been incorporating two other two other kind of legs of the stool here as far as our mission. So the second part of that is promoting sound farming practices. So with our farmland protection programs, we're protecting land by the acre. And then with promoting sound farming practices, you know, we like to call it protecting farms by the inch. So let's protect the acre and move to protect that soil on those acres, which is the really valuable resource there. And then the third part of our mission is, you know, keeping farmers on the land. You know, you don't have farmland, you don't have farms without farmers being able to farm it. How do we keep farmers profitable? And then how do we think about that next generation of farmers on the land as well? And then if you think about, you know, those three primary categories, what we're focused on, we really work in a couple of different ways. The first is we're doing that through national initiatives, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But we see these national initiatives as targeting critical lever points where AFT is poised to make a real impact. And then we also do that through state and regional programming. So we think those state and regional programs keep us grounded in agriculture's realities. And it really allows us to test new concepts and replicable models on the ground working with farmers. So what, where, and how do we work? So I gave you a little overview of those three primary areas of our mission. But from a regional and state perspective, we have offices in California. We have a Midwest office, a Mid-Atlantic office, a New England office, a robust program in New York, offices in the Pacific Northwest, and then of course our headquarters is based in Washington, D.C. And then how do we work? Again, a lot of different programs, but really centered around 5 different categories. So we advocate and we develop policy. We educate. So many of our programs revolve around outreach and education to different stakeholders and constituencies in the ag sector, whether it's farmers, whether it's landowners, and others. We innovate. What are new programs? What are new models? What are new methodologies that we can focus on to achieve our goals? A lot of research. We investigate, you know, different things around land use, policies, programs, et cetera. And then very importantly, we collaborate. So this partnership with Danone and SEC is one example of that collaboration. Talking about our national initiatives, you know, we have different initiatives that are essentially focused on different parts of our mission. So, you know, one of our well-known initiatives is our Farmland Information Center, which is actually a national resource and a center for information about farmland protection and stewardship. So that's farmlandinfo.org. We have a research initiative, which primarily focuses on research around land use and conservation outcomes. So we have one of the best land cover data sets and analysis available across the United States. And again, we study different aspects of farmer demographics and understanding their issues and barriers, whether it's adopting conservation practices or other areas revolving around conservation on the land. We have a Women for the Land initiative, which really is focused on and addresses the obstacles that women landowners face in accessing conservation programs and resources. We have a more recent initiative, which is our National Ag Land Network, which is focused on providing critical services and information to states that have farmland preservation programs and other land trusts. We have a climate initiative that supports farmers and ranchers in adopting climate smart farming practices. And then we have a water initiative that's working to understand and optimize production decisions and really focused on soil health and the outcomes both agronomically and economically that those soil health practices have on water and on the economic outcomes that the farmer has when implementing those practices. And then, of course, we have my initiative that I call Ag Conservation Innovations. And really what I'm trying to do within my program and how it relates to sustainability and more importantly, corporate sustainability and supply chains is I think really the sustainability, corporate sustainability, supply chains, they can really have an impact in understanding and thinking about how we fund and implement conservation programs. So is the current conservation funding and implementation paradigm delivering the results that we want? Is it sustainable long-term, and does it really incentivize the behavior and outcomes needed? So what are the problems we need to overcome? So one, we know we do not have enough funding with current conservation programs. And I don't think we have enough focus on outcomes. And I think that's where Danone and SEC are really bringing some focus and some tools to the table that can help advance the knowledge in that regard. And then third, what are the roles and needs of participants in all nodes of the supply chain? So collaborating and understanding those needs are very important. And so how does that go into developing an initiative vision? So I want the Ag Conservation Innovations Initiative to help be a driving force for changing the ag conservation funding paradigm. And very importantly, corporate sustainability plays a goal in that. So those programs that corporations are implementing can help diversify, this idea of only having federal funding and philanthropic funding as a part of the equation. So how do we bring in impact investment dollars, corporate sustainability resources, and local and state funding into that equation? And then again, focusing on outcomes. Jennifer talked about the ability of sustainable environmental consultants in their eco practices platform to really identify and quantify many of those outcomes that we're looking for. And then the strategies that we're doing that in. So if we think about, again, corporate sustainabilities, AFT needs to be better able to understand these corporate sustainability initiatives, understand the supply chain participant needs, and assess the potential for mitigating impacts. So, understanding how companies internally assess and value carbon, water, nitrogen, and be able to help explain that to farmers and those in the ag sector. Understand how companies work with farm suppliers to assess and mitigate supply chain impacts. And again, being able to communicate that to ag stakeholders. And then how do companies prefer to work with partners to achieve goals and outcomes? And how can AFT really collaborate and be a partner in, and again, delivering that information to the ag sector, ag stakeholders, and then be a part of actually potentially delivering one-on-one technical assistance, support for the farmer when they're going through those processes. And so that actually leads into the project that we're all talking about today. And this is really AFT's first foray into these ideas of both a thoughtful and practicable project. So thinking about soil health for dairy suppliers. And so again, you've all heard a little bit about the partnership and the partners that involved: AFT, SEC, NRCS, that's Natural Resources Conservation Service, Danone, and the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. And Julie will get into more information about this, actually more of the details of the specific project. But AFT is an important collaborator in three different areas. One, being able to kind of coordinate and lead a lot of outreach and education activities, farmer education, organizational collaboration. Two, being able to be the go-between for these evaluation and assessment systems. So being able to work with the farmer one-on-one to collect the information that SEC can utilize to develop the eco practices report in the continuous improvement plan. And then third, providing that targeted one-on-one farmer support. So assisting in implementation, and then helping prepare the farmer in accessing resources. So whether that's federal resources, whether that's additional private resources, et cetera, we can be a focal point for bringing all those parties together. And really, what are the steps of how we accomplish that in relationship to this project? So again, the first step is really targeting those links, the farmers. So obviously Danone and SEC have great linkages directly to their direct suppliers of those farmers that are supplying milk and that kind of raw product to their processing facilities. And they're able to link up with many of the providers of feed and products directly to those dairy suppliers or to those dairy farmers. But there's a whole other group of individual farmers in these areas, these supply areas, these feed sheds that need that technical support, that one-on-one support as well. And AFT can help target those producers and help deliver that one-on-one support. And then two, helping that farmer and those partners build sustainability from the ground up. Work through those processes with the farmer, understand what's happening on their farm and where they can make improvements. And then potentially help farmers decrease the overall crop inputs that are needed. And along with that, understanding where they can improve the resiliency of their soils and the resiliency of their crops and their farm by implementing soil health practices. And finally, that all leads to increasing the sustainability and the farmer profitability. By doing all these things, ultimately the farmer is more profitable, and Danone and we as the general public are able to realize all those benefits that come from getting those soil health practices, those regenerative agricultural practices on the ground. So really being a key link in having all those parties work together. And that's really, I guess, our goal, and our hope is this is hugely successful, and it's a model that folks and we can continue to work with the partners together in the future. So that's my presentation, and I'm available for questions.
Thanks so much, Brian. So I think actually I am going to switch this up a little bit instead of pausing for questions right now, because we don't have any specifically for Brian in the chat. I'm going to go straight to Julie. A lot of the questions or clarification she might provide, because she's going to go into the specifics of this particular project in this area. So I'm going to go straight to Julie, and then we'll go into our panel discussion. I see that we do have some questions that have been popping up in the chat. If we've not replied to them yet, we will get to them during the panel discussion. So don't feel like we are ignoring you. So let's go ahead and go straight to Julie. She's already sharing her screen. Go ahead.
There we go. Okay, so as Brian said, I'm going to touch a little bit more on what we're doing with the project right now, kind of where we're targeting and what we're looking to do in the next couple of weeks, months, and kind of what we have done so far with the project as well. So I want to introduce myself. I am the conservation technician for Ohio. As you can see, we're in these 7 counties outlined in red. We chose these counties because of basically where the Danone dairy started, and then we expanded through that. A lot of these counties are also in a critical watershed, so it is important to target them with soil health practices. My contact information is here, and for those of you who are asking about how farmers can get involved in this project, if you're based in Ohio, I will be the contact person for you. So there's my email and my phone number. If you're joining us from Kansas, this is Kinsey. She lives in Wallace County, Kansas. She cannot be with us online today, but this is her information. These are the counties that we are targeting in Kansas as well. And this again has to do with some of the locations of the Danone dairies that kind of kicked off this project before we expanded a little bit more with National Fish and Wildlife and NRCS and AFT and SEC and all of that. So as Brian said, our three main project goals are outreach and education, evaluation and assessment, and targeted one-on-one technical support. So we're really looking to support the farmer in every asset of their participation in this program with us. And kind of what that looks like, I'm going to continue to break that down. So as far as outreach and education, we are currently contacting grain farmers supplying dairies in the target area. So those would be those 7 counties in Ohio and any of the highlighted counties in Kansas. We are hosting this webinar series, which is going to continue throughout the rest of the year, and we are planning to cover different soil health topics, kind of as an informational way to reach farmers while we are unable to reach them in person. We are planning to host, eventually, if possible, you know, everything is COVID dependent, either late summer or early fall workshops to host farmers and kind of bring education to them as much as possible. And another facet of this has been meeting with area resource professionals. As Brian touched on, we want to make this project as collaborative as possible. So we are already obviously working with Danone North America, Sustainable Environmental Consultants, and this grant was built off of National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, but we have also been working very closely with NRCS and extension individuals in our target areas, because they are the ones that have, you know, the hands-on, boots on the ground information when it comes to targeting area farmer needs when we go to implement some of these soil health practices, regenerative ag processes. Another facet of this is the evaluation and assessment, and we are going through the process with SEC. So myself in Ohio and Kinsey in Kansas are going to be meeting one-on-one with these farmers to understand what they're doing now and, you know, build on anything that they would like to implement or build on what their farm needs. So how can we best serve the farmer in a way that also incorporates regenerative ag into their process? And again, this is why we are working with SEC to get those on-farm reports and the Sustainable Continuous Improvement Plan for the farmer. And we are hoping to really build those relationships with them in a way that is assessing what they need and bringing it to them in a way that incorporates regenerative ag into their process. And with all of that comes this targeted one-on-one farmer support. So farmers who engage with us will receive that current farm report and the skip from Sustainable Environmental Consultants. And I will be meeting one-on-one with the farmers to gather that information that we do need to get those forms to them. And really, as Jenny touched on, it's not a cookie cutter design. You know, we are going to be going back and forth with these farmers to figure out what their current needs are. And if we get a plan back that isn't exactly what they were looking for, we're going to really work with them to give them something that they feel they can implement should they choose to do so. And again, building that resource and building the funding assistance. So should a farmer choose to go through this process with us, we would encourage them to, you know, find funding if they need to implement some of these processes, whether that be, and I'm jumping onto my next slide, whether that be, you know, from a farm bill program like EQIP or CSP, or whether that be another outside funding from Payment Ecosystem Services or H2 Ohio funding and any other local funding opportunities. We are really encouraging farmers to participate in this program, and we are going to help them do whatever they need to do to implement that. So myself and Kinsey in Kansas will be working really hard with the farmer to get their plan, go over their plan with them, and help them research, you know, funding opportunities should they choose to implement some sort of regenerative ag process and they aren't 100% able to fund it themselves yet. And I just want to touch on this very briefly because I know a lot of the people that are participating with us today are resource professionals, but we are including these environmental benefits. They do matter, and it is important to incorporate that understanding when we are talking with farmers. Obviously, our goal is to support the farmers the best that we can in helping them solve any on-farm issues that they currently have. But touching on these soil health principles, touching on what we can do to support the farmer and also incorporate, these environmental benefits is something that we're really trying to do. And then finally, this is my contact information again, and this is Kinsey's in Kansas. That should be easy to remember. So please reach out to us. We are looking for farmers currently to participate in our project. We do want to open up basically enrollment to our project. I know there was a question in the chat box, but it does not cost the farmer anything to participate with us. Obviously, if they chose to implement some sort of regenerative ag, that could, cost the farmer something. But as I touched on, we're going to work really, really hard to make sure that that farmer is supported financially in the beginning. Our project page is up here. You can visit it for more information. And also, as I said, we are hosting a webinar series. So we will have a webinar coming up in May. So look for the registration for that. And with that, I go back to Ashley.
Great, thanks, Julie. So I think that may have cleared up some of the details that maybe people were curious about, but I do want to allow all of our participants the opportunity to ask Brian and Julie any specifics about AFT, our projects, and this project specifically. So we do have a question here in the chat for Brian and Julie. How did you decide on the counties you listed in Ohio as target counties to work with? And is this a marketing area or future area for dairy farm growth? So Brian and Julie, if you want to, Brian, this might be more a question for you if you want to handle this one.
Sure, that actually was a conversation when we were kind of envisioning the project and wanted to essentially focus on areas that were, I guess, larger feed shed areas for areas around a number of dairies that were Danone suppliers for milk. So, it's and there's still actually quite a number of farms that are, livestock farmers. There's not only dairy, but just the thought that there's a general need and a desire to work with farmers in those areas because of the presence of those dairies that are suppliers for Danone. So really part of that feed shed area is where we were focused on.
All right, thanks, Brian. Any other questions for Brian or Julie? Okay, if you think of anything, feel free to throw those in the chat. We will bring those up in addition to the other questions that we have for our panel as a whole. So if I could ask all of our presenters, Brian, Jenny, and Tina, to go ahead and unmute yourselves, turn on your video if you can, so that we can address some questions as a group. And I'd like to go back to one of the first questions that we had in the chat box that was directed at you, Tina, but I wanted to kind of change it up a little bit and direct it towards the whole group. And this question had to do with sharing information about the importance of soil health management practices and how do we get that information out to our consumers, whether they are farmers, whether they are people in the grocery store. How have you guys gotten that message out? So Tina, I'd like to start with you because each one of you have kind of a different demographic as far as consumers go. So Tina, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. So I had put a couple links in the chat for anyone who may have missed it. It's worth going out to take a look. We're just starting to unlock the conversation with consumers. Horizon Organic is our brand that's going first with this messaging. We had 11,000 acres that was enrolled in the soil health program in 2019. And then that was expanded to over 20,000 acres in 2020. So, you know, you'll see 11,000 acres targeted on the website, but Horizon is bringing to life this program called the Next Frontier Project, which is really about becoming the first carbon neutral milk brand of that size by 2025. And as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, regenerative agriculture and soil health can help us with our greenhouse gas emissions and our ability to reduce to a net zero proposition. Consumers want to be part of that. And so, you know, we're able to share this story with them to, you know, to help them with purchase intent around our products. But more importantly, we're partnering directly with the farms that are part of this program. We have direct contracts with over 600 farmers on the Horizon Organic brand. And you'll see in those links that we've set up a series of incentives that are part of that program to help farmers as they move through, you know, some of the changes that might occur on farm that include soil health, but also other things related to their energy use. So I'll stop there and pass it back to you, Ashley, because I know you wanted the rest of the group to be able to talk about this as well.
Yeah, so I'll come to Jenny next. When we are talking about consumers for you, it's slightly different than the consumers that we might think of for Tina. So how do you get your message out to your customers about the importance of soil health?
Yeah, great question. And I think soil health is certainly you know, one component. But how do you talk about regenerative agriculture, this new you know, definition that's used so often, and sustainability and the difference? And we work together with our clients and with partners in different projects on those communication strategies, because it's not just one solution for that, but we really focus on the outcomes, as we mentioned today, and you all have commented on with the outcome-based approach, and using that to be able to back up our story with the science.
Great, thanks, Jenny. And finally, Brian, how has AFT really sold the story of soil health and sustainability and regenerative ag, as Jenny and Tina have added to that?
Yeah, so, you know, we do that in a couple of different ways. So we actually do that both with landowners that are actually renting their farmland to farmers, and then we actually do that with farmers as well. So let me start with the farmers. One of the things that we've done through a conservation innovation grant, and we've actually worked with farmers across the country to do this, we've developed multiple what we call soil health case studies. So we've partnered with farmers that are successfully implementing soil health practices and developed these relatively easy to understand, easy to read 2-page case studies that really highlight the farmer's experience with adopting soil health practices. So kind of their, you know, things that they didn't do so well and things that they really excelled at as far as implementing practices. And then we quantify multiple outcomes. So we've been able to quantify the economic outcomes as well as the environmental outcomes. And we're able to utilize those case studies in multiple ways. So we can use them as examples when we do soil health workshops with farmers. You know, we've done series of webinars, both with farmers, conservation ag professionals, that they can turn around and share with farmers, because we want to show and demonstrate to farmers that may be curious or are not sure that they can successfully implement those practices. We want them to have confidence that they can do that. We also use those soil health case studies with landowners. And so AFT has really been able to implement a great program involved around conducting learning circles focused on women landowners, actually. So having women landowners understand soil health principles, how they can have conversations with the farmers they're renting their land to about soil health practices, about regenerative ag practices, so that there can be a really a partnership in improving the asset, improving the land, and being able to adopt soil health practices. So, you know, we've had a lot of great programs, both with outreach and education for farmers and landowners.
So it sounds
And
like
I just want to add.
Oh, go ahead, Tina.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ashley. I just want to add how much I refer to those soil health case studies, Brian. So I did put the link in the chat for everybody. Sorry, Ashley.
No, that's fine. Thanks for adding that in there. But I just want to add it. It sounds like everybody kind of has a slightly different technique that we have been able, as a group now within this project, kind of weave together and bring our different talents and our different resources together to provide to the farmers who are participating in this program, or who we hope to participate in this program. So we just want to come over to Julie now, who set up just a few more kind of discussion questions to get everything going here. And I want to encourage everyone who's participating to still keep your questions coming in the chat box. But Julie, let's hear from you. What kind of questions do you have for our panel?
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. I just want to touch on what advice would you three give to individuals who are looking to engage the supply chain, or even to, you know, encourage their own corporations to engage in the supply chain? Maybe Tina, starting with you, you know, as Danone has been kind of a pioneer with this, how would you encourage resource professionals to expand on that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Julie. Thank you. I think the central part of this conversation needs to be less about the climate impacts and more about the economic impacts within farming. I think if you actually focus on carbon sequestration as an outcome, you end up losing people along preconceived lines on whether or not, or how deeply they believe in climate change, whether or not they believe it's part of their mandate to do something about it. If instead you make the focus about supply chain stability based on a return on investment for the farmer and farmer economic viability and longevity, and I mentioned it earlier, next decade, next generation, because we know that we have a cliff coming of farmers that are not necessarily able to transition their farms onto the next generation. This is meaningful for your business's bottom line. There is disruption coming either from a climate perspective or from a supply chain continuity perspective. And so if you look at the economics of it, you're able to capture more people's attention about why this is so critical for them. Whereas if you talk about climate change, people tend to think of it as being more, you know, somewhere else, and it feels less tangible for the work that they themselves are doing. And so just reframing it a little bit can really help with getting all the stakeholders on board. And I'd be really curious to hear what the other panelists have to say.
Let's go ahead and go ahead, Jenny. I was going to say, let's just go ahead and keep the same rotation.
Sure, I can just add to that. I completely agree with Tina. There's a lot of conversation right now around carbon, and I think, you know, any conversation towards progress is great. However, I think if you focus too much on one piece, you're leaving out the other pieces to the puzzle: water, biodiversity, soil health, carbon. It's an ecosystem, so you have to look at it from a systems approach. And I'll mention a little bit from a sustainability risk management standpoint to understand your supply chain. It's resiliency in your supply chain, but it's also that reputation aspect and kind of getting ahead of different questions and pressures and being confident in your supply chain and farmer partners, and providing that provide the proof and the data.
And again, thinking a little bit about my vision as a part of my initiative, I really see a couple of gaps here that are really starting to be filled. So the first gap is I think from a company perspective, a corporate perspective, in which Danone is a leader in, you know, there's resources dedicated to and have the capacity and the ability to understand, what impacts they might be having from a supply chain perspective of a producer of agricultural products. So, understanding, their impact on carbon, understanding the impact on whether it's water quality or water quantity. But I think there's a whole other group or another tier of companies, especially companies in the ag sector that don't have the resources, they don't have the capability, they don't know how to address mitigating or understanding the impacts that they're having. So can AFT have a role in helping, this other tier of companies, understanding those impacts and ways to approach, mitigating those impacts, and kind of in an analogous manner, approaching the farmers. So in the past, farmers really haven't had the tools to understand, their impacts from a carbon perspective, from a water quality perspective. How is what I'm doing on the land really impacting, the environment? And if I have choices that can both benefit me economically and can benefit the environment, if I have the information available to me that helps me make those changes, I think farmers will be more inclined to make those changes. So I think AFT can have a role and help move that process along. And when I talk about tools that farmers can use, obviously eco practices and the information that tool provides is a great piece of information that I think provides that information that farmers really need and are hungry for, many of them. So it really helps advance the conversation and helps them advance kind of what they're doing at the farm level.
Great, thank you, Brian. And that kind of feeds me into the next topic for discussion. Is we've talked about these organizations and how resource professionals can engage their own organizations in targeting or understanding supply chain resiliency. Now, what has been some ways that each of your respective organizations has been able to bring in the farmer into that conversation? I mean, obviously we have this project here, and this is a really big push to bring farmers into that conversation, but in what other ways have we been working on bringing farmers into this?
Yeah, so I'll just touch a little bit on Danone's programs with our farmers and how we source. So we source directly from over 700 family farms within our supply chain, which is quite different from most big CPGs, consumer product goods companies like us. Many of the other companies of our size are focused on a commoditized market or sourcing through a co-op, which means that any change they make is at a mass balance level, which means they might change a portion of the supply chain, but not really know, all the bits and pieces about who it's with. The fact that Danone has direct contracts with each of the farms spanning 1 to 2 years, and in some cases 5 years or longer, gives us a position of strength as it relates to constant relationship and conversation with those farmers about what's necessary for them to have a viable business and what resources they need. So it's part of where my role is come in and bundling these outside funding opportunities to help stack with the farmers' finances, with our public commitments that we're paying to help with conversion, paying for technical assistance like eco practices. All of these things are innovative. All of them are a little bit different from what you would hear of other companies of our size. And so it's the strength of Danone sourcing program that we have so many people directly within our business that are having those conversations on an ongoing basis with farmers, and that we're looking to partner and collaborate in an innovative way, just like what we're talking about here with AFT. And I'll kick it over to Jenny to talk from the SEC perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's incredibly important for everyone to be at the table. We don't make decisions with one part of the supply chain and have a success throughout. Everybody needs to have a seat at the table for these conversations. And I kind of mentioned a little bit from SEC standpoint, very passionate about agriculture and being farmer focused. And I mentioned realistic, maybe once or twice through my little time today, but we bring the common sense to the science and want to look at realistic opportunities. I think it's easy to say we're going to have a huge impact if we put a methane biodigester at every single dairy in Ohio or every single dairy in the Midwest, and that's just not realistic. We're not going to set goals and say we have to hit this percent by this date. It really is kind of back to Julie when she mentioned that this is a collaborative effort project together with the producer to figure out what's the opportunities and strengths with their operation. And I think that's how we'll be successful in moving forward.
Yeah, and I will just actually second what Jenny said. And one of the ways actually that AFT does that, really in any of the projects that AFT typically either would lead or be a partner in, I think we really try to incorporate is that ag stakeholder perspective. So, establishing, for example, from an overall project perspective, establishing an advisory committee or kind of a peer group that we can go to throughout the project and get feedback on, strategies, activities that we're focused on, and be able to essentially adaptively managing, a lot of the things that we're focused on as far as, again, as those activities, et cetera. Sometimes that can be in advance of the project, maybe, doing a series of listening sessions or focus groups. So getting that feedback in advance. So as we develop a project idea, we really have those ideas from farmers or those in the ag community, so we can develop appropriate and reasonable activities moving forward. So again, just always having that input, that feedback from farmers and those in the ag community is very important and really is crucial to having a successful project.
Great. Thank you all so much. I'm going to open it one more time for any final questions from anyone that is still participating before I toss it over to Ashley for closing remarks. And while we're waiting to see if any other last minute questions pop up, I want to let everyone know that I'm going to be posting in the chat a kind of exit evaluation for participating in this webinar. It will be posted in the chat and you will be receiving it via email from me after we're finished here. But if we don't have anything else, Ashley?
All right, thanks everyone. So I do want to give our participants one more opportunity to unmute themselves and ask any questions that they might have of our panelists here. This is about the only webinar that we are going to have with these panelists participating. Our future webinars are going to be farmer focused. So we wanted to give all of the resource professionals, our colleagues, the opportunity to talk with our partners about this project as we are rolling it out in all of your areas, so that you could get any more details that you wanted. You could put a face to some of the names of these corporations that are helping us with this project. So I just want to remind everyone, this is kind of your last opportunity to ask any questions that you might have. I don't see anyone coming off of mute here. So we will go ahead and wrap it up. I know originally we said this would be from 2 to 4. We wanted to allow plenty of time for questions and discussion and that kind of thing. But I am going to chalk it up to the fact that all of these amazing presenters and panelists just explained the project so well that there is no gray area. There are no questions. And if you email Julie or Kenzie or I with questions in the future, we're not going to answer them because you had this chance and you didn't ask. I'm kidding. We will answer all of your questions, of course. So with that, like Julie said, you are going to see a link in the chat box for a very brief survey. I think it's like 6 questions, very, very easy. It's really to kind of garner what more information we can provide to you on this project, what information you think the farmers in your area would find valuable, and help us design those future webinars that we referred to. So originally a part of this project was going to be holding in-person meetings. The grant was written before we ever knew COVID was a thing. So that has changed our plan a little bit, but we want to make sure that we are still providing all of that soil health, regenerative ag, sustainability information to the farmers in our areas. So in future webinars, like I said, those are going to be farmer focused. We are hoping to bring in various farmers who have participated in some of the different activities that we are featuring for this program, who are, we're going to bring in soil health experts, but we want to hear from you about what you think is very important and what your farmers would like to hear about. If there's a specific speaker that you would like to hear, if there's a specific topic that you would like us to touch on, now is your opportunity to fill out that survey and let us know about it. So be sure to go there and take a look. Like I said, the recording for this presentation is going to be available on the website for the project. That is www.farmland.org/Danone NA. So you can go there. That website also has a lot of various information about the project, has my contact information, Julie's contact information, and Kenzie's contact information. So you can get in touch with any of us there. And I believe that is it. Be sure to watch for the registration for our next webinar is going to be coming up at the end of May. We're going to try and make that on cover crops. We want to make sure farmers have plenty of time to make cover crop decisions before they need to go in this fall. So be sure to be on the lookout for that registration link so that you can share it with all of your contacts. If you have any farmers in your area that you think would be interested in learning more about participating in the Soil Health for Dairy Suppliers program, you can also send that contact information to either Julie if you're in Ohio or Kenzie if you're in Kansas, and they will be more than happy to reach out to them and set them up with a meeting, with an assessment plan, take the next steps as the farmer sees fit. So with that, going once, going twice, no one's coming off mute. I'm assuming you don't have any questions. Again, be sure to just contact me if you have any additional questions or need more information, and we will send you in the right direction. So thank you again to all of our presenters and our panelists. Thank you to everyone who participated, who joined us for an hour and a half today on what I'm presuming everyone is probably in an area that is fairly spring-like and beautiful. So thank you for sitting inside and listening to us talk for a little bit. We appreciate all of your support and participation as we work on this project in your area. So thank you again, and everyone have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.